Talk about a good start. Imagine the thrill of starting your marathon running over the iconic Sydney Harbour Bridge, the sun rising and the city waking up beneath your feet. This isn't just any race, it's your chance to run Australia's first ever Abbott World Marathon Major. The TCS Sydney Marathon, presented by ASICS Ballot, is open now. Don't miss this opportunity to be part of history. Register at tcssydneymarathon.com.
All right, Lee Shroop, welcome to Inside Running.
Thanks for having me.
No, of course, mate. Thanks for coming on the show.
I'm disappointed Brady and Brad aren't here.
I think they are too, actually.
Yeah, you are. Not in person. Oh, well, we meant to be in the studio.
Yeah.
We've got to go back to the start then.
Actually, just wondering if you remember, we might as well start with this, having a crack at, they were pacing the Gold Coast Marathon.
Yep.
Do you remember having a yell at Brady?
Absolutely. Pacemakers have got to, stay on course and do a good job. And, much to his wonderful development, he heeded what I had to say and he came back and was fantastic from that point. So, yeah.
Well, it's hard to not listen to one of our only sub-10 marathoners. So that's for those who don't know, we have listeners through Europe now, and maybe they haven't quite understanding about how fast you've been, but you are one of our 5 sub-2:10 marathoners.
Yes, and we need to get someone else in that upper echelon pretty quickly.
Well, we'll get to that, but let's start at the beginning. Let's talk about your early days running. Newcomb, Whittington area?
Yeah, Whittington, yep. So started running. Dad wanted to lose weight. Everything was sort of starting to take a little bit of precedence with Robert De Castella at the time. He'd won the World Marathon Championships. We had the Commonwealth Games in '82, which he had that great battle with Akanga. So, Dad wanted to lose weight, and so he bought books, like Run Like Deke, Eat Like Deke, Train Like Deke, and Adidas had brought out, the De Castella trainers and the Rotterdams. And so my dad went head in. He just went straight for it. And so as a young kid, you always want to emulate your parents. And so it was pretty much our bonding time would be, he'd get home from work. He worked at Alcoa, so he was in the ingot mill working long shifts. And he'd get home at, 4 o'clock and we'd be out the door at 5 o'clock running just a little 3-kilometre loop around our estate. And, it's where it all started.
Yeah, well, you went to Newcomb or Geelong High School?
I went to both. So I went to Newcomb High, and my brother, unfortunately, was expelled, and they were going to send him to Geelong High, and my mum asked me whether I wanted to transfer schools, and I wasn't exactly the sharpest tool in the shed, and I thought, oh, fantastic, new school, new teachers, I might be able to pull the wool over their eyes, and that didn't happen. It was actually worse because, you go to a new school, and particularly when you go into year 10, you've got to make new friends, but everyone's cemented friendships from year 7 and year 8. So it was a tough transition, but at the same time, I sort of feel like from every negative comes a positive, and I guess the experience there certainly helped set me up for the rest of my career, particularly from that point, heading over to the US where I had a running scholarship.
Well, what about in Australia, the public school system doesn't cater very well for running. Like, I went to Oberon High School. We had some good runners go through, but there was no pathway for us. We might do a school race once a year, then go into the next one and the next one, but that's it. Did you have any school mentors or coaches back in the day? Yeah,
high school running was actually pretty big in Australia, and there was a really big push when I was at primary school. It was the Life Be In It program, and they were trying to get people off the couch and to actually have an active lifestyle. And it was big norm sitting on the couch burping and drinking a beer. And when I was at primary school, I remember my teacher Jenny O'Markin, she would reward us for every kilometre that we ran.
She was a teacher of mine at Anglesey Primary School later in the...
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
She would give us, for every kilometre that we ran, we'd get a certificate, and it was more of a colour-in certificate, and I'd take them home and I'd colour them in, and I would run before school, lunchtime, after school, kids would count laps, and I just loved it, and it coincided at the same time, as I said, with De Castella and my dad running, so I was just running all the time. We always hear about the Kenyans that are running, 6 7 kilometres to school and back, I guess in essence, even though I wasn't actually doing it in one run, I was running in the morning, through school, after school, and it was just something that I loved. But we used to have like the Geelong school system where, you know, you'd go down to the Bowen River and you'd have your cross-country race down there or at Eastern Park, and then you'd go into zones. So you'd have like Western Zone, you know, then the Western Championships, and then the Vic All Schools that then would lead to the Australian All Schools. And so when I started in year 7, I think, you know, I progressed from being the fastest in my school, and I did all right at the Geelong region, but I didn't progress past the Western Zone. And so each year I got better and better until, you know, in year 12 I actually won, you know, the local, you know, the Western Zone, the state championships, and then the Australian Schoolboys Championships, which then led to a scholarship offer, which I didn't even know you could get that beyond that. So I think we do have systems in place. I just don't think that we have a unified system, because when I was there running the All Schools, and I think it was in 1991, it was actually combined with the Australian Championships. Now, I had no idea what that was. I won the Schoolboys Championships, but I finished second to a guy called Brett Cartwright. Mm-hmm. And Brett Cartwright won the Australian Championships, and I was second, but he wasn't at school, and so it was just confusing. And then everyone was talking about that I'd make the World Cross Country team, and I had no idea what the World Cross Country team was. And as it turned out, no juniors except for Susie Power went to the World Cross Country Championships in '92 when they were in Boston. But I think we do have a system in place. I just don't think we have a very unified system, and it would be something that I'd like us to see, not necessarily adopt like the high school and NCAA portfolio, because there's a high attrition rate of burnout, and you know, we do see a very minimal point of success of those athletes that come out of that program. But I certainly do think that there's a means to be able to do that. Like, we have the university games, which is seen sort of for maybe 2/3 of it as just like a beer drinking party type atmosphere. But I do think with the right support, right funding, right metrics, that we could actually probably turn that into 50% and make it actually another pathway for our governing body to be able to look at some talent identification, provide pathways for coaches to be able to go and obviously be a part of this as well, where they're going to be coaching at universities, coaching athletes, going to championships like that. So I think that just adds more to the talent pool, and it just obviously brings everything under one umbrella.
Yep. So you're in year 12, or you've just won the Australian Schoolboys, and how did you get to that point? So did you have someone guiding your training? Was this just you reading Deke's books, going out and blasting away?
So like, I just trained with my dad until I was about 16, and then my first coach was a guy called Brett Carey. He ran for Geelong Guild. He was a local guy. He also used to run in the winter for a team called the Ballarat Harriers. And so I started being coached by him, and even though I ran for the Chewell Athletic Club, and then I signed up to run with the Ballarat Harriers. And the running culture in Ballarat was 100 times greater than Geelong. Our track season was great, but we didn't even have a team that was competing at the winter AV competition. So I got to run for Ballarat Harriers. I got to understand a lot of the history and legends that were part of the Boulder Harriers, you know, such as Stan Nichols, and then you start to work your way up and you hear about guys like Brian Lurie, and, you know, so for me, you know, Rob McLennan, and then you get to compete against Ballarat YCW, where there's Steve Moneghetti and Dennis Boyle and John Walsh. And, you know, people won't even know these names except for Moneghetti. But, you know, as a 16-year-old, like, you're overwhelmed with it. And, you know, being a running enthusiast, you know, I was on cloud nine. And so they were great introductory years for me. And I ran with the Ballarat Harriers all the way up until like 1998. I'd gone to the Commonwealth Games, and then at that point I was like, all right, I want to start creating this culture in Geelong. And that's when I set up the Geelong Region cross-country team, which started in 99. And we started with young people by the name of Craig Mottram, you know, Richie Jeremiah, Mark Fountain, and then, of course, look at the success that we've been able to have in the last 20 years of just having that. So I guess, you know, little things come along that you can either stop to learn and educate yourself, or be naive and ignorant and wander on. And I'm just glad I was able to stop and smell the roses and realise that, you know, you can take something as small of what was happening in Ballarat and you can spread it anywhere when you've got the right people. So it's been good to see little things like that grow, and it's just been through a process of starting to run with my dad, running in school with the help of Jenny O'Markin, and then going to high school and competing, and then my first coach, Brett Carey, who had, you know, an association in Geelong and Ballarat, and it just all came together.
Yeah. So tell us, I mean, you mentioned you went to college. Tell us about the drive down the highway to talk to Mona about that decision.
Yeah, so I had got a couple of scholarship offers, and at the time I was sort of seeing someone, and then I wasn't. It was all over the place, and I thought, well, if anybody knows, what I should do, it'll be Steve Monaghetti. And I was like 19, 18, and so I called Mona and said, look, do you mind if I come to talk to you? I've got a scholarship offer, and I'd like to take it up. And so I drove to Ballarat in my little mini miner, and I got to Mona's house, and Tanya was cooking, as she still continues to do today. And so I sat down with Mona, and it was in Mount Clear, or Mount Helen, where his house was at the time. And I just said, look, I've got this opportunity to go to America, a scholarship. My mum says I should take it because there's no guarantees in life. And, Mona was like, don't do it. Like, the burnout rate is like really intense. You'll go there and then you'll come back, burn out. You're underdeveloped if you stay here for 2 or 3 years, and, just get yourself in, with the older guys and learn their ways. You've got a chance, and you've got some potential, and at least here, you'll be a lot more protected. And so I remember driving down the highway, and, I got home and I said to my mum, I'm not going to America. Steve Monaghetti said I shouldn't go, and if Steve Monaghetti says that, then I'm not going. And anyway, about a week later, I broke up with my girlfriend, and I rang the school and said I want to come. So it was, again, funny how certain things happen. But, I jumped on a plane and flew over to a junior college, which I didn't know the difference between NAI, NCAA Division 1, 2, 3, National Junior College Association. So I was actually at a junior college in the panhandle of Texas, Levelland, Texas. And I arrived on day one with a surfboard, with the closest ocean being 7 hours away. So it was a tough transition. But again, I'm thankful that I had a great coach that was at the school. He'd coached people like Philemon Hannick, Brian Sheriff, Leogard Martin, who were great runners in that 80s, 90s. And, on day one, I sort of got there, and I didn't like it. In the panhandle, there's like pump jacks, and there's like cotton fields as far as the eye can see. And my parents actually gave me a one-way ticket, and they said that if you want to come home, just let us know and we'll pay for the return ticket. And so after the third day, I'd had enough. It was just so barren and isolated, and I called my parents and said, look, I want that one-way ticket. It's not working out. And my mum turned around and said, we knew you'd say that. You're there for 6 months. And she hung up the phone. I ended up being there for 18 months. And I guess, there's something to be said for tough love. And I remember after the first month, my coach pulling me aside, sort of saying, look, you've got more ability and talent than you realise. You just don't channel it in the right direction. And that's when he went through with like who he'd coached and having to believe in a process and a plan. And after I sort of bought in, the rest was history. I was able to be competitive with some of the best Kenyan athletes in the programs that were going to NAI schools and NCAA schools, and got the nickname the White Kenyan, which was obviously a term of endearment, but it certainly was just noted that when I got out and raced, I'd always put it on the line regardless of who. And I think just like through my youth, of obviously through primary school and high school, and that experience and exposure of Ballarat with Mona, and certainly that experience that I got for 18 months in the US was definitely the whole basis of everything that took off once I came back to Australia in 95.
When you came back, what PBs were you bringing back with you?
That's a really good question. I think it was like, I'm going to say maybe 14 minutes, 29 minutes, and I hadn't ran a half or anything like that. So I'd say that was probably what I was running at that time, yeah.
And at that point, so a 14-minute 5K guy going out of college, you wouldn't have thought there was a professional career in it for you? Or were you pretty confident at that stage you were going to make running your job?
Well, when I got off the plane, I was already determined that I was just going to jump in a car and drive to Ballarat. I was going to ask Mona to coach me, and that's where I was going to be. And I was going to throw everything I had at trying to make the Olympics for 96. If I didn't make 96, at least 2000. So
in the 5,000, that was your goal?
It had always been the marathon. Like growing up with De Castella, I always wanted to run the marathon. And knowing that Mona obviously had run at the Olympics in 88 and 92, knowing that he was going to try and make 96, I just figured there'd be no better person to train with. And having known him from when I ran in my junior years, I thought it would be a be a great fit. So I think I was home for, not even less than 3 or 4 hours, with my parents who hadn't seen me for 18 months, and I was already gone to Ballarat. And, I'd got Mona's number. I'd called multiple times for no answer. And so then I just drove around to his house, and he'd actually been in Melbourne doing the Olympic Dream 10K in November. And so I knocked on his door, and, I just sort of said, look, I've driven all the way up here. I, want to be coached by you. And Mona was just like, look, I don't want to coach, but if you certainly want to jump into training, I train 8 o'clock every morning and I'm 5 o'clock every night. I'll give you 3 chances, and, you can slot in and just, turn up tomorrow. And so that's pretty much how it started. Paul Burge, who is one of my best friends, I was sleeping on their couch in their house. And then I graduated to a single bed in his bedroom. So he had his queen size bed and I had a single bed. I had to get a job, so I started working for Shell. I was just managing a petrol station out in Beaufort. And so it was the hard task of getting up early, getting back, and then getting to training. And then we graduated to getting a 4-bedroom house, which I could then have my own room. But I went through that whole process building up there. Ironically, when I'd made the commitment to go there, it was November 94, and then a month later, I ended up in hospital with a broken jaw and shattered cheekbone and a blood clot in my brain. I'm getting assaulted late one night, and so that sort of put a dent in that sort of early 95 part, but I'd already committed to Ballarat, and I was already there, so I went through, I guess, the trauma of having made a pretty tough decision of wanting to move to somewhere to run, but then I wasn't able to run for 3 or 4 months. But I was in a really good environment with Mono and obviously, Paul Burge and the other guys that I was living with. So I was in the right place for stability and keeping me, motivated, even though I couldn't run. But then once I got going, 95 was really just more of a build-up year and just trying to get back to basics again before we sort of launched into 96. And, obviously I didn't make the Olympics, but being there and seeing how Mona trained and what was required to be a good athlete certainly, was an eye-opening experience for me, because everyone can talk about it, but unless you know, they're two different worlds.
Well, tell us a little bit about what it was like day in, day out with Mona.
Yeah, so Mona, like the rule of thumb was that, we would meet at a time, and if you weren't there within 5 minutes, you would just go, regardless of who you were. And Mona was actually pretty busy in those early years. Like I remember we'd get up and run, and then I'd drive him to Melbourne where he'd do his radio show, and then he'd go and have a speaking engagement, and he'd have some other commitment on, and then we'd drive back home, and then we would train again. Sometimes we'd be training at 9 o'clock at night. Like I'd always put my run off to run with him, and if we flew in late, and we knew we weren't going to get back to Ballarat until after midnight, we'd have to fit the run in like at that particular time so that we got it in on that day. And it was all these little things that I call the 1%ers that made Mona. Like if he got back to the house and he was doing an hour run and it was 59, 48, he wasn't running on the spot for 12 seconds. He'd go back out and do another 30 to 40 seconds and come in and be overtime. So we used to joke that, there used to be a TV show called Men in Black, MIB, and we changed those details of MIB to More is Better, being a marathon runner. But, just his training and his work ethic, like he was always extremely relaxed and composed. But when he came to training, like he trained hard. And in those first years, like in 95 and 96, like he would just towel me up. But training was going to a whole new level. Like Mona had been consistently doing, like, say, Mona Fartlek around the lake, running it between 18 and 18:15. Occasionally he might blow his doors off and run 17:30, but he was always obviously the top dog and he could control everything. And so when I came, I'd obviously come from the American system where there's that propensity to train hard. And so I'd go out there and we weren't running any slower than 18 minutes for Fartlek. Like we were consistently hitting 17:45 to 18 minutes. When Mona was doing quarters on the old Lamberis athletics track, he'd be running 14 to 14:20, and we'd be running 13:45, 13:50. So it was extremely competitive. And then I went on a couple of training camps with Mona, like we went to Noosa and Townsville. And again, just seeing the commitment that's required, scoping out places that we were going to train and just training hard, and getting away from your comfort zone of what you're used to in your home environment. So all those little things were the things that I really took away. I mean, the Moneghetti Fartlek and the Deeks Quarters and the Benson's Hills, there's no rocket science in any of that. It's just how you apply that training every day, over every week, over every month for 2 or 3 years. And then all the other things outside of that, like Mona was very big on me getting physical therapy once a week, getting massage once a week, and making sure that I treated my body with respect, because if I did that, there'd be less chance of injury. So again, all those little tiny things certainly added to what I needed to know in order to be, a good athlete. But it just took time. Like I said, 95 and 96 were the developing years. They were good years, but they were hard years because I just wasn't getting the breakthrough that I really wanted to get. But when I look back now and I read back through my training journals, they were just stepping stones that were getting there. But as athletes, we want to go from zero to hero overnight, and we don't want to do the 2 or 3 years that's required to get there. But certainly those 2 or 3 years of working under Mona, or working with Mona, certainly set me up for having the 20-year career that I had.
Did you ever get over competitive during training? Any incidents where maybe you guys took it a little far?
Oh, there are many great stories. The best story that we have is in Townsville in 97. Mona was getting ready for the World Championships, and I'd had an unbeaten run in 97 with a lot of races, and I'd won, the Australian Half Marathon Champs, and, we're getting ready for City to Surf, and we were up in Townsville, and we found this mountain that we're going to run up. It might have been Table Mountain, I can't remember. But anyway, it was a 2K hill climb. And so basically we were going to do this 2K hill climb, come down, then we're going to do basically 20 minutes of hill intervals around the neighbourhood. So we'd made up a very mini Boulder hill course. And then we got down on back to the track, and then we're just going to finish off with a fast 400. So we did the 2K hill climb, and we came down, and then we did 20 minutes of hills, and we got back onto the track and finished with the 400. And guys, Julian Painter, Sean Quilty, Rod DeHyden were all at the track doing a workout. So once they finished, we all grouped up and we were all jogging back to our apartment. And Rod DeHyden asked me, how was the workout? And I innocently turned around and said, it wasn't as hard as what I thought. And Mona just looked at me and goes, it wasn't as hard as what you thought, hey? Let's do it again. And I was like, all right, let's do it. And I thought it was a joke. And as we're running up to where you had to turn off to do the run back to the apartment, or you just keep going straight back up this hill, Mona's got like 40 metres on me, and he just keeps going. And I'm laughing, going, okay, you can turn around now. And Rod DeHyden looks at me and he goes, he's not coming back. And so I took off as hard as I could, and I'm chasing him up the hill, and I didn't catch him, and I get to the top, and I was so angry. I was like, Mona, we're doing it a third time. I'm going to grind you into the ground. And he looked at me and he goes, don't be an idiot. I've got a marathon coming up. You've got the City to Surf coming up. And so I was angry for like 2 days. And but as it turned out, Mona went on, 4 weeks later or 6 weeks later to win a bronze medal at the World Champs, and I won the City to Surf. So it was little things like that our competitiveness rivaled each other, but it did it in a very sportsmanlike way, where we both wanted to get the best out of each other. There were times that he would spit the dummy for a day or two over something that I did, and I'd spit the dummy for a day or two over something that he did. But, you always found that you'd always get back and centered, and it was always about training and pushing each other and trying to get the most out of each other. So, again, I look back on all those things that we did, and I wouldn't change anything for the world.
Yeah, it sounds like he's been the major influence on your career.
Oh, absolutely. There wouldn't be anyone that comes remotely close. And it's not that I'm trying to put anyone down, but when you spend 6 years with someone every day, and you're training day in, day out, you're training at 5 a.m, you're training sometimes at 11 o'clock at night, to travel together, to be on team camps together, everything that I apply to my coaching today are the experiences that I got just with that relationship that I had with Mona. So, he obviously is a great friend, but at the end of the day, it's I looked at our training no different than the Kenyans. Group training, it's not necessarily the training, it's the group training, and we had a great group training environment, but we also had the right mentality to get the most out of each other, and it was business. It was not to be taken personally. Have a thick skin if someone cracks a joke, and sometimes you're tired, you're running 220 Ks a week, and someone cracks a joke and you become a little insensitive because you are tired, but it only takes a day or two for you to snap out of it when, you're sort of slapped over the back of the head and just like, hey, wake up, it was a joke. So I think, a lot of just my personality and that thick-natured personality that you have to have, is obviously a tribute to the group that we had and the training that we did.
Well, the skins are a little thicker down Ballarat Way because after you left, Nath Hardigan came in and maybe took over the joke side of things.
Good. I mean, you've got to have that clown. You've got to have someone there that keeps things, lighthearted and fun. And I think that's the thing I look at with running, and particularly with my coaching, is I look at the athletes and their personalities and try to mirror their personalities with training. And for me, I've always been an extroverted person. I'm a sprinter in a distance guy's body. And if you clamp everything down and try to become a monk, you get a negative reaction. And so you've always got to, what I say, please the beast. And so for me, I'd love to go out and have a beer and enjoy myself, particularly in my downtime, but I was always at training the next day. So, I'd come to training occasionally with a hangover, or I'd only got home 1 or 2 hours beforehand. And, even though the run was 2.5 hours, the stories could go on for 4. But, obviously then when it was time to put the head down and train, that's what it all became about. So it was always finding that balance, and that's where I feel like Mona was able to help complement that. Like, you have a 3-strike rule and you're out, and, I didn't hit any one of those strikes based on the fact that I knew what the limitations and the scopes were. But it was all about fun, it's all about friendships, and at the end of the day, no one died, so it was all about just living every moment that you had and making sure that when you did retire, you either fulfilled your ability as an athlete or you walked away knowing that everything that you did, you had a fantastic time doing it.
Well, we could talk a lot about your track career, and obviously you broke the Australian record, Ron Clark's record in the 5K.
Yep.
But I want to talk about your marathon career and your debut. So that wasn't too long after that race, was it?
Yeah, so I actually was only doing the 5K as part of training. So I wanted to run a marathon much earlier, and we kept trying to delay it. And, Chris Wardlaw had a lot of influence in that, where it was just wait till 99 because, the IAAF and IOC window for Olympic Games opens on the 1st of the 1st, 1999, and you have an 18-month window to qualify. So if I ran a marathon in 97 or 98, it would be null and void. So we'd pick London pretty early out. So I did Tokyo half marathon early in that January period. There was a 3K and a 5K, and I was like, that's just going to be great training for me. So I'm going to not back off for the 3K, which was in Sydney. I'm just going to fly in off a 110 mile week, and then get ready for the 5K, and I'll taper for that. There was also the World Cross Trials, so there was a whole heap of things in that period that we'd pick. So went to Tokyo, ran 61 flat. I ran my last 10K in 28:30. Ran my last 5K in 14:08, and still only got second. But then I did the 3K, and we'd flown in that day. Got in the afternoon, went to the track, ran 7:41. Didn't know that I'd missed the Australian record by 0.1 of a second. Then flew home and then did the 5K. And so I knew I was in good shape for the 5K, but my goal seriously that year was to run 7:55 to 8 minutes for the 3K off a heavy week of training, and then run 13:20 to 13:30 for the 5K. So when I ran 7:41, I was like, I think I'm a shot to run faster. And I went into the race like I had with the other race, just race the Kenyans. Don't be intimidated, don't get caught up on splits. I went to the lead a couple of times, and obviously I got out-kicked by Luke Kipkoski, but when I crossed the line in 13:14, I wasn't shocked, after what had happened, particularly with that January-February period leading in. But everything was building towards London, and that was what the whole part of it had been. And I think had I not had London and these races were my only focus, I'm not sure the outcome would have been the same. So I sort of think sometimes you get your best results with the less thinking that you do. So they ended up just being, a process leading into London. But
after those 3 races, how did you adjust London goals? Did you think, all right, I wanted to run 2:11, now I want to run 2:8?
No, I was always going out there to run quicker than that. Yeah. The way the London race panned out, unfortunately, I could have ran much faster. We didn't go through the first half. The first half I was expecting to be relatively quick. We were 65:10. The pacing was set up for 63:30. And 63:30 after you've run a 61 half should have been a walk in the park. But I'm in a group where, you've got Antonio Pinto, Dion Ciron, who else did we have at the time? The Moroccan it'll come to me. God, I'm starting to lose my marbles. But there was John Brown. Like, you had the world record holder. You had the Olympic champ. You had European champion. So I sat in a group of people that were, that I wanted to race, and everyone just sat in the group. And one of the runners took off, and everyone just stayed back. And so we went through the first half in 65:10, and then we started to pick it up, and then we started rolling. But I got to like 34, 35 kilometres where I ran out of legs just because of the change in pace that was happening. So I ran 2:11 on debut. I went 65:10, 66:10. But I honestly feel on that day, had we ran like a very evened race, I would have run a sub-10 for sure. But, woulda, coulda, shoulda, it doesn't really matter. But I knew after that race and running 2:11 that I could run a heck of a lot faster. I was like, okay, it'll just be a matter of time now. And as it turned out, I only ran, four or five times where I ran faster, but I didn't really achieve what I thought I could really run. So
and so that qualified you for the Olympics. Yep. Mono was on that team.
Yep. So we had to do the Olympic trials in Sydney in April. And I ended up getting a stress fracture up at Falls Creek training. So I had a stress fracture in my femur. So I ended up having to have like 8 weeks off, and I only had 6 weeks to prepare for the trial. And I had a guy called Richard Narurka from England that was living with me, and he was injured. And so we were cross-training a heck of a lot leading into the trials. I had to make sure that no one with a time faster than mine got in. I think we had 3 or 4 guys that were at 2:14. So Rod DeHuyden, Pat Carroll, there might have been Ray Boyd, Sean Quilty. I'm probably leaving 1 or 2 out. Magnus Mikkelsen was going hard for the time, and he took off. But I just stayed there. It was just a process of elimination. I knew I was going to run out of endurance at some stage, which I did. But Rod DeHuyden won the race. I think I finished 5th. But because no one else with the time ahead of me, that secured the 3rd spot. So it was Mono, DeHuyden, and myself.
Just on this, a bit of a sidetrack. How do you feel about the marathon trial?
Well, having lived here in the States, I think it's a must. I'll be critical to myself. I think one of the areas of weakness I had is when it came to major championship races, being able to learn how to accelerate, de-accelerate, surge, counteract surge, heat, like hydration in heat. If you look at my career, take away Sydney, because I obviously got injured tearing my stomach muscle, but particularly Athens and Beijing, they were performances well below what a 209, 210 guy should do. But I certainly think that lack of being in a baptism of fire where it's an all or nothing scenario. I never had that, because I went to city races where they were all paced, and that's why I could run 2.9, 2.10. I could pick the race knowing the weather. I could pick the course knowing full well where it was going to be. I knew who the pacemakers were going to be. I knew who the field was going to be. I could easily strategically place my drinks and fluids out there. And you can just train to run fast. But I didn't really know how to change gears and counteract a plan A that was falling apart with a plan B, a plan C, and a plan D. So I'm all for trials. I think it would be fantastic to have. If we look at guys like De Castella, they had them in the day. I mean, Deke started out as a 224, 226 guy who ended up running 207. I think we need to get some of our Aussie marathoners back to actually being at the level that they are and not what they think that they are. Everyone wants to jump on a plane and go to a Berlin, Chicago, Rotterdam, and they judge themselves as an international athlete because they've bought a ticket, but they're running 218, 220, 222. I think they could do that in Australia, and they could actually do that as a building ground to get better and better and better, save money, be able to do it. And again, it comes down to hardships. Have a little bit of hardship for a couple of years, follow the process that some of our best marathoners have done to set yourself up for success. And as I said, those do or die races, I think you see the cream rise to the crop, to the top. And if I didn't make an Olympic Games because I failed at the trials, would I be upset? Absolutely. Would I probably want to, have a right to protest? Yes, I would. But if I didn't make the team, I'd certainly at this particular time, looking back on my career, going, I just wasn't good enough, and the best athletes got chosen. So there are some flaws with the American system, but there's also some positives, and I think that would be a great positive for our sport. And at the same time too, I know Gold Coast are very open to wanting to have an Olympic trials, it's just great for our sport to have people that are naive coming out and following people on the course and getting to know them. It just adds extra profile.
Yeah.
And it also gives some of our athletes a chance to step up to a platform that people may not have ever known. All of a sudden they get to know. I mean, it's great when we look at, Jess Trengrove. I mean, that was fantastic at Gold Coast. Gold Coast was fantastic for me in 2006 when I was able to win. So I think, again, we have the right formulas like we talked about with high school athletics and university athletics.
Yeah.
We just need to bring it and tidy it up and bring it all under one umbrella.
Yeah, I love the idea of having a trials for guys like myself and that ballpark of maybe someone who runs around 30 minutes for a 10K. All of a sudden, they have one 10K a year where they can try to do something well in Australia. There's a real lack of them. But if they had a trials to go for, all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, we need to run 222.
Yep.
We need to run 220 to make it. And all of a sudden, the AV crowd, if you look at the Boulder State Vic Championships, you've got the top 15 guys. 10 of them are trying to make that time. And
I'd look at 230 because we don't have the depth of runners to go 219. So the IAAF standard's 219. I think we need to look at 230. I think at 230 that would allow maybe sort of 15 to 20 guys. With women, I'd be looking at 3 hours. So even though the standards are off from where they are as an IAAF, it just opens it up to potentially someone that's unknown. We saw Ali Kaifer run New York Marathon last year, and she ran 26 minutes faster than what her personal best was. She just didn't get it right in her marathon attempt prior to that. So I think by just opening it up a little bit, there will be an outlier that will just all of a sudden step up to the plate that we won't have known or heard of that ends up maximising it. And I think that's what the fairy tales of sports are all about, is being able to give someone a shot that wouldn't necessarily have had that shot. And so I don't think we've got anything to lose, but then people are just like, well, no, we don't. So back in the day, it was like Deke was getting paid to run, I was getting paid to run, Mona's getting paid to run. The athletes that we've got now aren't getting paid to run. And if they are, it's very minimal. So I don't think we have anything to lose by throwing some cash for prize money for athletes to run. I mean, what Gold Coast did this year with that $40,000, I mean, that's incentive. And I wish we had men that step up to the plate to do that. And we got Jess that stepped out there. And, I admire that. I really do. Like, she stepped out. She got out of her comfort zone. Yeah, she could have gone and done another marathon later on in the fall and picked up some appearance fee, but she did that. And I think that really is a role model to follow and a template to follow, that we could make our sport even better by doing that. And it would be good to have cities like lodging bids to be able to have it. I mean, the Sydney Marathon and then opening that up as a general marathon was fantastic. And I think April's a good time to do it. The weather won't be extremely hot, but it'll still be warm, so it'll test people, particularly if they want to run in that August, September. I mean, Tokyo is going to be stifling. So you want to send your best team equipped for the weather, not just your fastest team on paper.
Like LA and Rio.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. The 3 best guys made the team, and they all performed unbelievably well. Like Jared was 6th, Meb, Meb didn't have a great day, and I'm trying to think of the third one. Galen. So like 2 out of 3 ran well. Yeah. We take 1 out of 3. Like 1 out of 3 would be good odds. Yeah. But they had 2 out of 3. So I think there's merit there. It just needs an overhaul.
Are you ready to make history with the newest Abbott World Marathon Major? The TCS Sydney Marathon is officially part of the prestigious Abbott World Marathon Majors, and now's your chance to take on its inaugural race. Sign up and enter the ballot today. There's a reason this marathon has become Australia's biggest. Our all-new 2024 course is faster, more fun, and delivers an unforgettable experience. With hundreds of thousands of spectators lining the streets, you'll be running through one of the most iconic cities in the world. The ballot opens on Tuesday 10th of December at 10 a.m. and closes Monday the 30th of December at 11:59 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Time. 1 entry per person. Results will be announced between the 8th and 9th of January 2025. This is not a first-come, first-served system. Every application is equally considered in a random draw. So if you encounter a wait when trying to register, just come back a little later. Whether you're chasing your first start or your 7th, Sydney is the marathon you've been waiting for. Enter the ballot now at tcssydneymarathon.com. Don't wait, secure your spot now.
Okay, well, I want to move on to talk a little bit about your training. So your training philosophy. Mm-hmm. Over here, you're the head coach of the Boulder Track Club. Do you have a very similar setup to what you used to do back in Ballarat?
It's very similar in philosophies, but some of the sessions are tweaked and changed just to accommodate, the American thoughts and fears and coming out of college and having things done at a certain way. And I think just as you grow as a person and you talk with different coaches, whether it's a Jerry Schumacher, whether it's a Ben Rosario, whether it's, Keith and Kevin Hansen, you certainly come up with some different ideals, and you don't want to take from them, but you sort of want to morph them into different things. So, but we still do Moneghetti Fartlek, we still do Deeks Quarters. I've got a hill course that's made up very similar to what we did at Boulder, in Ballarat. But then I've just tweaked some different workouts and put some different, fartlek workouts in, some different hill climbs. We do a marathon progressive tempo, an 18 miler that we do 8 weeks out, then the traditional 3-hour run 6 weeks out, and then the 18 miler again 4 weeks out, and then factoring the racing in and around it. So, and being at altitude, it's a little bit different. Like, you can't train twice a day every day here. So I have my athletes, not do a second run on a Wednesday and a Sunday, but they're doing 5 doubles through the week. We don't do 3 sessions, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. We do Tuesday, Friday, just because the altitude itself is another, added stress on the body. So I try to balance it out overall, so that when I look at a 16-week marathon block, I'm looking for as much consistency as I can, rather like really low peaks and high peaks. And then it makes it hard, obviously, from racing, because I'd love to throw guys into some local races, but again, you're racing at altitude, so you're not getting the leg turnover that you would get if you went to sea level. But then if they go to sea level, then they've got to get on a plane and fly, and it's 2 or 3 days of, trying to get them all amped for that race, and then it's 2 or 3 days recovery once they come back. So a lot of things have had to change to fit into what we have here to make it work. But when you look at guys like Sean Quigley and Jonathan Gray and Laura, it certainly has worked, and I'm sure as I move along there'll be other things that I'll tweak as I continue to grow and learn the sport.
Well, you've mentioned 3 coaches that do quite a bit of specific work for the marathon.
Yep.
So that's not a lot. We don't see that much back home. There's a few breakaway athletes who might do their own thing, but it isn't an Australian thing to go out and run 35k at a quick tempo on a flat course. It's different. So do you that 18-mile progression, is that one of those type of workouts? No,
like those workouts, and so let me be clear here, like when it comes to coaches, no coach is wrong. Every coach is right, and I respect every coach, and every coach has different methods and philosophies that they go with, and it's up to the athlete to morph into that and to believe in that. I look at how hard those guys train, and it's like they're trying to get that one outlier. So Desi was that outlier, when you look at the Hanson's model. And you then got to weigh up, all that work with all that group for that one person. Now, they're all sponsored, they can afford to just keep bringing people in and continually going through a cycle. Whereas with me, I don't have that luxury. We're not sponsored. Athletes that are here don't have any money. So I have to look at everything in a very, pragmatic, but also very long-term plan of how can I build them in, not take them to the well on those workouts, be a little bit more cautious so that they don't get injured, because not having any sponsorship money, if they get injured, then that's so much money for MRIs, x-rays, physical therapy, massage, which they can't do. And so I want to keep them in the sport, and we might only get 95% out of it, but I'll never go for that 100%. So in saying that, the 18-mile progression is done a little differently than what those guys do. So, it'll just be a very simple of, okay, this is what our marathon goal is. I want our last 6 miles right at what this marathon time is. But from where we start, each 3 miles is just progressively getting quicker, and we're dropping anywhere from 15 to 30 seconds a mile as we keep moving along and just sustaining that period. But I do it off an extremely heavy week, so there's no freshening up, and I just think that 18 miles is just enough. Once I start looking at 2022, then I feel like that could be the difference of them breaking down physically, mentally and emotionally versus staying on top of it. So if we finish the 18 miler like I did with Laura on Sunday, and she feels like that, it was just enough, that's great. Like today we did a workout, and she was just not slightly on her game just because she was tired from what we did on Sunday. So just bringing this one workout in, it's already worked for Laura before we did London. It worked for Sean before Boston. So it was just something that I sort of looked at different things and thought, okay, I feel more comfortable with that. Yeah. And I think that's the thing, is that those guys all feel comfortable with those workouts. I mean, the Hansons got Brian Sell, to run 2:11 doing those workouts. But then, as I said, you've got to look at all the people that they have. I just don't have the luxury to throw all that. And, I go back to the rule Chris Wardlaw said years ago when I started training 3 times a day. And I said, Chris, the Kenyans do it. And he's just like, there's 1,000 of them, there's only one of you. So, in those groups, they have a bigger pool to be able to throw all that work at them to get that one outlier. Whereas I don't have that luxury to do that. So I don't want to risk just killing off the only 1 or 2 top athletes that I have.
Yep. So over your career, you had Mono as a coach,
yep.
relationship. You were part of Melbourne Track Club for a time, were you?
97 to 2001, I think.
Was Nick giving you any coaching advice?
No. Nick was just purely an agent back then.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about Steve Jones?
Yep. So when I came over to the States, I was only going to come here for a year. And I was going to do Boston Marathon, New York Marathon, and retire. And I thought, Mono had been an advisor for a lot of my training, but I had been coaching myself a lot. I'd sit down, we'd talk about different things, but if I wanted to change it, I would change it. So when I came over here, it was just going to be for a year. And so I called Jonesy up, who I'd known for quite a while, and just said, did he mind just writing out programs for me for a year and jumping into his workouts, which was great. So in that year, I did Boston, and then I was like, I don't know if I want to retire. Like, maybe I might want to try and make a 4th Olympics, and I can do it from here. And so I trained with Jonesy, and it was great. It was just a little difficult because at the time Jonesy had a lot of college kids that just got out of college, and he was getting pulled left, right, and centre. And I turned up to training with a program that was marked out, but then the training program would be changed based on discussion with the athletes, and I just felt like I was being coached by some of the kids just out of college as opposed to the great Steve Jones. So I just decided at that point that group environment wasn't for me. Nothing against Jonesy, because as I said previously, no coach is wrong. Yes. It's whether the athlete can gravitate into that. And I guess if I had Jonesy as a singular coach, it would have been a great fit. But just in that group environment at that time, it just wasn't my fit. And so we went out to Flagstaff, and I was out there sort of taking a look to see whether we were going to be happy there. And I love Flagstaff for running, but my wife didn't like it at all. And, I got to, sit down and chat with Greg McMillan at the time, who had his McMillan Elite. And, so pretty much it was a choice of either come back to Boulder and go back to coaching myself or go back home to Australia. And I wasn't really at that point ready to come home. So I just went back to coaching myself.
Yeah, all right.
And the good thing I'll say about Jonesy, though, was the simplicity of his training. Well, it was just like Mono and Wardlaw. Yeah. Like Jonesy's staple workout was 8 by 2 minutes. There's no science to that. Jonesy was a world record holder. So when you look at all that, I think that's the thing that I admire the most, is that if you can keep training simple, you've got a greater chance of productivity as opposed to making it complicated. Once you start to throw in GPSs and metrics and zones and, thresholds, and I don't know if athletes have the bandwidth to comprehend it, but B, do it in a very balanced and easygoing way. I think they're stressed because they've got to hit these certain targets.
Well, one of the ongoing topics, actually, as a point of discussion on the podcast, is racing with a watch versus racing not having feedback on your splits or whatever. We've all had success actually turning the splits off and maybe only seeing 5K splits or not seeing them at all. How do you feel about that?
Well, it all depends where you're going to be in the race. Like if you're running for a win, you don't need a watch because you could be running along and then all of a sudden someone drops a 250k and it doesn't matter what your watch tells you. But if you're in a marathon and you're not running for the win and you know that you need to strategically hit your splits, then I think that's a great guide. And, you want to justify all the training and all the work that you've done to make sure that you can run from start to finish extremely even. So there's pros and cons, but I always laugh when people are actually going into a race and they're crossing the finish line turning off their watch. It's like, the race organisers have spent thousands of dollars putting up race clocks out on the course and timing mats, and you don't really need it, particularly if you're going to run. So I know with a lot of my marathons, I did not at any time look at my watch. I would hit my split button, but it was always for me to look at it after the race. If someone surged, it wouldn't matter. You'd take off and you'd go with them. So, you don't want to be a slave to technology, but I do certainly think at times that technology can be beneficial based on things. Like I remember Berlin 2007, and we took off, and I got dropped at about 18 or 19 kilometres, and I was probably like in about 30th position at that stage, and so we took off, and I got to about 22. I thought my day was done. I still think I went through in about 63.50, but I was like, okay, I'm just going to have a day out. And I'm running along, and I'm hitting my split button, but I really wasn't paying any attention. And then I got a drink at like maybe 35 kilometres, and the girl that was on the bike said to me, "You're in sixth." And I'm like, no. She's like, "You're in sixth." I'm like, what? So I just kept going, and all I was trying to do was hold a pace, but I have no idea what my splits were. And I remember I caught the guy, so I got into fifth. And I remember we were going through the Brandenburg gates, and I could see the finish line. I looked at my watch. I was like, oh, crap, I'm going to be just outside 2:11. I thought I was running 2:11.30 until I crossed the line, and it was 2:10.31. So because I didn't get caught up in it and I just raced, I was more focused on that than actually like looking at my watch and, thinking, okay, splits are getting slower. Because I think that's what happens. As soon as you start to see yourself drop 5 seconds or 10 seconds, you start to become disheartened, particularly when you then try to push to get up. And then you've put in all that effort and you can't make up that time. And then you start thinking, okay, there's 10 seconds gone. Yeah. There's 30 seconds gone. Some of my best races, honestly, have just been where I'm just not thinking. I just jump in the race and I run. I used to always on a Friday night, before workouts, get home, have a pizza, have 2 or 3 beers before I'd go out and do the hill workout with Mona, and I just race Mona. It wasn't like I was sitting there having pasta and carbo loading and doing all these things for the workout. I'd have carbo loading done on Tuesday night for my long run Wednesday and Saturday night for my long run Sunday, but I never overthought those things. I mean, most Friday nights, Mona had fish and chips, before we went out and did a hill workout. So
he still does.
I know, it's traditional.
Next to our store at Steve's Fish and
I know, and we've been going there for years. Well, I don't anymore, but I know Mona still goes there. Yeah. So I think there's rights and wrongs to it, but I do think that a lot of people would get more benefit if they just ran to feel and just how they are. Like, you get into a race and you run easy and you're not sure what your splits are, but then all of a sudden you start to pick it up and you still don't know what your splits are. You're amazed when you cross the finish line thinking, oh my God, I was only 30 seconds off my personal best. Had they started the race off going, I'm going to go for this personal best, and they're looking at their watch every kilometre and all of a sudden they're off, then they're usually going to be like a good couple of minutes off their time. Yeah. So
that's that negative feedback sort of chain that's what I used to tear me down. If I started to feel bad and my watch was telling me I was going slow, I would just go into it would just get slower and slower. Well,
Mona and I used to say, we'd run 200 to 240 kilometres a week, but now with Garmin's and GPSs, we'll probably only run at about 180, 190, but it doesn't matter. Yeah. Like the good part was we were just like our easy runs are 4 minutes to 4:30 per K, and we just ran that, and that was like what we would use as a metric. If we looked at a watch and we were running 5 minutes per K, could you imagine how demoralised we'd be? Like, no elite athlete runs a 5 minute K. You'd be like trying to, so you would end up doing your second runs harder. You would end up doing your easy runs harder because technology is telling you that you have to. Yep. Whereas if you don't have it, you just run to feel, and that was how we trained for 20 years. Like I tell my athletes, the only watch I had was a sundial, like that's how old I am, because they're so caught up on it. And if they're having bad workouts, I take the watch off and throw it on the ground. Yeah. And I don't let them know what the splits are. I just let them run to how it is. And the workouts end up getting better by them not knowing. Yeah. So like I said, I think if you're on song and you're having a day out, it's fantastic. But a lot of times you're not, and then that's when that piece of equipment and that technology becomes detrimental.
Yeah. All right, let's have some more fun questions.
Okay.
The Australian landscape in distance running at the moment, it's actually it's pretty exciting for me anyway. We've got Stewie McSween, he went to school in Ballarat. He's running in Diamond League races towards the front. Where do you feel the next sub 2:10 guys coming from?
That's a good question. Like, you definitely have to look at someone like Stewart. I think if you look at the guys like Collis, who certainly had the potential, and Ben St. Lawrence, I think they probably stayed on the track just too long. You know, even Craig Mottram. You know, like those guys, without any shadow of a doubt, could break 2:10 for the marathon. But I think when you keep them on the track just that little bit too long, it takes away from what that base work of marathon is. Because being a great track runner is one thing, putting in the endless mileage that you need to do for a marathoner, which is quite draining and tiring, is different. And so for a track runner, you've got to keep your speed. And so all these guys have definitely, they're not doing marathon training for track like what I was doing. They're doing track training for track. So it's a different, you know, training mechanism that you need to do for marathon running. So if they, rather than maybe run exactly out to what their life expectancy is on the track, if they are able to just bring it back a little bit and put that extra time into the marathon, I think they've got every chance of doing it. But some of the mistakes that have been made are no different than so many other track runners. Bob Kennedy, you know, like sub 13 guy, like they all ran themselves right to the end of their career on the track, and it was like, oh, we'll just transition into the marathon. But the marathon's not what it is anymore. Like the marathons are time trials. You know, like back then, a track runner could step into the marathon because it would be a 2:9, 2:12 race, and it would be tactics. You know, whereas now they're all set up for 2:03. And so the guys have the speed, but they definitely do not have the strength endurance to maintain that. And then what happens is they're on their own. You know, so all of a sudden you either go with the pace, where, you know, if you get tired, you're still going to hang on and run, you know, something quick, or you've got to go with the second pack and third pack. And if everyone just falls apart, you're on your own. So, you know, to their defense, marathon running and racing is completely different from what it used to be. But yeah, I'm excited by Stewie. I mean, even Brett Robinson, like, it's just great to have him back, you know, running well. Like, I'm a big fan of his. Like, I just think from a strength component, and I'm talking like just mental strength, like he's a really tough competitor. So, and then, you know, you go through that whole group of what we've got. Like, I seriously think our middle distance to distance is like the best it's been ever, you know, particularly from depth. But yeah, when you start to look up for our marathon, you know, I'd always hope Shelley would be the guy, because he's certainly capable of running sub 2:10. I don't know, we just sort of drop off, you know, to that sort of 2:13, 2:14, which sort of becomes the norm.
Well,
so
that's right. That could be part of the problem, is that 2:13, 2:14 all of a sudden is looked at like, oh, you've had a great marathon.
Yeah.
Whereas when you really look at what they're running on the track, we should be going, hey, you're a 2:09 guy. Yeah,
I mean, like I said, I think it's sad that I'm the last guy to do that. You know, I ran 2:10:31 back in 2007. So that's still, like, that's 11 years, you know, and so we've got to get guys faster. And, you know, I'd love to see like a marathon program sort of set up where, you know, like we have a team that's, you know, just committed to trying to develop our next marathoner. I mean, we're getting guys in Europe now that are running 2:7, 2:8. You know, I mean, the European Championships will just run in 2:09. Yeah. So there's certain models that have been changed and implemented to be better. And I think Australia can do that. I mean, we just got a wealth of knowledge with Mona and Deke, and, you know, like Dick Telford. I think Dick Telford's one of the most underrated marathon coaches that our country has, you know, with the success that he's had with all these athletes. And our women's marathon running, man, that is just at an all-time high, you know, with Lisa and, you know, like Jess, I mean, you know, even Shanae, like there's just so much talent, and like our team for Tokyo is going to be pretty tough to pick. Like, I mean, there's going to be, you know, 5 or 6 girls that are going to be knocking on the door, which, you know, growing up with, you know, Lisa Ondieki and Karen McCann, like, it's just great to see their legacy become what we have, you know. So, I mean, we're not like America where we've got Joan Benoit. We're obviously a little bit behind, but I really feel like that our women's marathon is just, at the moment, like, it's really setting fire around the world.
Yeah, it will be. Tokyo will be a very good team.
Yep.
So, another fun one. Someone puts you in charge of Athletics Australia tomorrow. What do you do first? First change you make?
Have everyone reapply for positions.
Overhaul.
Yep.
Yeah. Clean house.
Yep.
Yep.
Yep. Everyone. and start fresh and look at people that, like, we have so many wonderful people that are outcast by our sport, that are on the outside, that have been treated rather poorly. And I would rather open it all up, like public discussion. Every single person is a stakeholder in our sport. Everyone that has a position at Athletics Australia is a paid employee of our taxpayer-funded money. Like, they're there because of us, and that should be seen as a privilege and not as a right. And I think over time we've had some people in those positions that it's a position of power, and it's not the way our sport should be run. And considering the lack of funding that we have, but yet how big our sport is from little athletics all the way through, I think I'd start with just a complete overhaul, and I'd present a vision that, you know, would be well up to 2028 with where we need to be. We talked about the schools, you know, we talked about universities, we talked about different breeding grounds. You know, the AIS is gone now. How can we implement something that was a very successful model? You know, look at training groups. Like, how can we empower coaches with groups rather than athletes being taken from groups and put in other groups? You know, people are leaving for sponsorship reasons, for better opportunities. Like, a coach or an agent can give them better opportunities, and we don't want to have a system that is controlled by one or two people. We want to have a very balanced and very neutral process to that. And that's not to say that in our sport at the moment that we haven't got good people. We really do. But one thing I've seen as an athlete, and what I'm seeing now as a past athlete, is at no time have we seen unity across the board. And it just breaks my heart seeing athletes that get frustrated and leave the sport, and athletes that have really great suggestions on things that we could implement, but they just never come to fruition because it's too hard for our administration, when it shouldn't be. You know, it's a collective voice. And that's what I do.
Yeah. So, any regrets over the course of the career?
No, I mean, I've always been a believer that you got to live life with no regrets. Are there things that I probably should have done differently? Yes, but I can't sit here now and say, yeah, I'm going to do that. Like, you're accountable for everything that you do, you know. And so, you know, I certainly trained as hard as I could. I got everything out of myself. You know, it's the old could have, would have, should have. I mean, if I was able to go down that path, yeah, I would change a number of things. You know, I probably would have, you know, listened to, you know, people that definitely had my best interests at heart. But as an athlete, it's a baptism of fire. Like, sometimes you take on it's me versus the world mentality, and you're too busy trying to attack and be the best. But sometimes someone sitting outside, they're already looking ahead. Like, you're stuck in a box. You can only see tomorrow. They're already looking to next week, next month, next year. And so I'd always take constructive criticism as like negative criticism, and get my hairs on the back of my neck to stand up. But, you know, it's all that is what has made me be the person I am now, and certainly the coach that I am. So the reason why I say I have no regrets is because if I went down there and changed all that, I don't know if I'd be sitting here now having this interview with you, and I don't know where my life would be. So I think everything happens for a reason, whether it's good or bad. But I certainly know that, you know, 95% of everything I've done has been positive.
Yeah. Good answer.
Yeah.
What do you need to make Geelong Marathon happen?
At the moment, just the support of the city. So I've spoken to the city in regards to it, and they like the concept. Now I've just got to wait until some private conversations I've had with emergency services, with state government in regards to this, and then hopefully within the next 2 to 3 weeks, I'll be in a position to be able to fly home to present that. And you know, I'm excited to, you know, hopefully have that opportunity, because it's always been a dream of mine to have a marathon in Geelong. I mean, particularly my hometown, and you know, like, we've had so many Olympians represent Geelong, and I'm not talking just in track and field, I'm talking across so many sports, and I want to use this event as a way to actually highlight every year a different Geelong Olympian on the participants' medals. Also look at ways that we can use this event for good, you know, particularly towards new areas that I'm focused on now, such as, you know, depression, and you know, how sport is a big catalyst for helping people, particularly running, help deal with those stresses that they have in their life. I mean, depression is obviously the biggest silent killer that we have in the world today. So if we can do something that elevates this to a bigger platform and allows people a bigger stage to be able to get out there and enjoy it, then it'll make everything worthwhile. So hopefully in a couple of weeks I'll have some exciting news.
Cool. That's really exciting, especially also myself being from Geelong.
Yeah.
Geelong Region Cross Country, I was actually a team manager at one point after Brett Coleman. Palmed it off, and then I palmed it to Sarah Walker.
Yeah. Well, like Neil McDonald come on after me, and, you know, like everything happens for a reason, and I was really passionate about having this Geelong team. And then obviously, you know, Neil McDonald come along, and then there was Brett, and then yourself, and then, as you said, Sarah. And, you know, at the end of the day, it's about, you know, creating opportunities. I mean, you look at Alish at the moment, I mean, like, she's running fantastically well. And you've got to turn around and say, well, having an opportunity of a cross-country team has what's helped in that. And, you know, I think, you know, looking at some of the people that, you know, we've got that represent Geelong, you know, like Bruce Scriven's just, again, just one of these guys that finds these talent. But these guys wear our singlet. Like that singlet with the semi on it I created because that was the symbol that Geelong had in the 70s and 80s, and I wanted to again have something that was about pride. When you wore the singlet, you were proud to wear it. So I think it's fantastic seeing the club still do as well as what it does. And man, I would love one day to go through a list of athletes that have won state, national championships, you know, major championship representation that have all come from Geelong. And just I remember the days fighting with Athletics Victoria and Glen Huntly Athletic Club that they did not want us to be a combined team because we'd be too strong. But in essence, even though we have so many different clubs, not one club has enough members to represent themselves, and that's why we became a combine. I mean, and now Ballarat is a combine. So my argument has always been, rather than turn around and say, no, Geelong can never have any runners, give us an opportunity to represent. It's all about depth and growth, whereas half those people wouldn't even run if we didn't have a team. You know, some would join Melbourne teams because this is their sport and this is what they love to do, but we've given opportunities to probably well over 1,500 people to actually continue running and do it in a place that, you know, they enjoy and represent their hometown, which I think is pretty cool.
Oh, it was the highlight of my running career, winning a championship at Geelong that year.
Yep.
It was the absolute highlight. Team environment with running we very rarely get.
Yep.
And that was still, look back on fondness. We won it at 10 in the last race. And,
yep.
Yeah, it was
and we won winter championships. I mean, it was a slow process and it was hard to, you know, start it. But everything's always hard to start. But once you get going, you get momentum. It's amazing how easy it becomes. And, you know, like I did exactly the same thing when I started the Boulder Track Club. You know, we did not have in this town a club that had a youth program, average recreational runners, and an elite team. It was either elite or recreation, but the two worlds didn't combine. And we have over 330 active members in the club. We have 5 different training groups. We've got a youth program, a middle school program. We've just started a development team. We have a high performance team. So, you know, again, it just started off with just me and a couple of mates having a beer and frustrated that there just wasn't a club that any single person can join without any discrimination at all. You know, it's open to anyone. And then to be where we are now, I mean, we're coming up to now almost 8 years of that club. And so I think it's pretty easy, like once you've got the concept, like if people love to run and they're passionate about running and it's just about them wanting to represent something. Yeah. And so if you've got a great, I guess, mission statement and there's that ideological thing that resonates with them, then, you know, you're set up easy for success. So, but I stepped down from, you know, the director of the club and now I'm the high performance coach. And, you know, I'm not sure after 2020 whether I'll continue coaching. I mean, you know, this year's just been a really rough year. I mean, particularly after the passing of John Gray, who was one of my top athletes, and he took his life in early February. And I know, just things are just a little different. You know, I'm just certainly not as balanced with the coaching as I once was. And you know, I think, you know, I'll obviously work through the remainder of the year. And, you know, that's not to say that I'm not putting in all the effort that I have to still coach. I'm just not sure now whether this is something that I want to do for, you know, the rest of my life. But, you know, I'm committed to 2020 and hopefully over the next 18 months, you know, things balance back out and I get back to just, you know, enjoying life a little bit more again and enjoying the coaching.
2 quick questions.
Mm-hmm.
What's Laura going to run at Chicago?
Mm-hmm. So I haven't been wrong so far. So when she ran New York on debut, I said she'd run 2:25 to 2:28, and she did. And then when she ran London, I said that she'd run anywhere between 2:24 and 2:26, and she was 2:25. So I think that on the right day, and if we don't have any interruptions with our prep, that she will run 2:22 to 2:25.
Very good.
Yeah.
Are you going to move to Australia, back to Australia at any point, do you think?
It's certainly been a big conversation with my family, particularly like a couple of years ago when my dad had brain cancer, and just being so far removed, sort of feeling a bit helpless. I will definitely say that it'll probably happen at some stage. We're sort of in a bit of a difficult phase because, as I said, I've got athletes that are trying to make the Olympic Games in 2020, and I'm committed to helping them to that point. Our kids are in school, so it's not just an easy pack up of, right, let's go back to Australia where, we'd have to put them in a school environment that's going to be relative to the education level that they're at here versus the education level back home. And then, that comes with, new friends and new setups. So, but yeah, and I guess the question is, if I come home, what am I going to do? And it's not through lack of opportunities. There's heaps of opportunities for me to go home and work, but I'm 45 years of age, and I've got so many irons in so many fires at the moment, and I'm still trying to work out what I want to do. Like, I'm doing race directing, and I've got an athlete management firm, and I had a running store, and I'm doing some consultancy in other areas, and I'm coaching, and but yeah, I guess that's going to be the $1 million question, is like, when I come home, what am I going to do? Because I won't be able to do these things when I get home. I could set up a coaching group, but that's just going to be for love and for fun. And, I don't know if I want to buy a running store again. I don't know if I've learnt my lesson on that. But, and I could do events. But, I'm not sure if that's the direction I want to go. And I don't know if I want to just go into a sports marketing role. I don't know whether I'd want to go into AA and start an overhaul. I really don't know. But I certainly think over the next 18 months, it'll become a lot clearer with what I want to do, and we'll make that decision then.
Great. Well, thanks so much for being a guest.
Thanks, buddy.
That was I got a lot out of that. I'm sure the listeners will too.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah. Would you say this is episode?
I think it's 42.
42. If it was 43, it would have been Mona's favourite number. So maybe just get him on there for old time's sake. But I appreciate
it. You are his good friend if you know his favourite number.
Oh, yeah. We're very close.
All right. Cheers. Thanks, mate.
You bet, buddy.
Fantastic.
Cheers.
Loved it.
Talking about finishes, picture it. Crossing the finish line at the world-famous Sydney Opera House, the crowd cheering, and your name forever etched in marathon history. This is your moment, and it starts today. The TCS Sydney Marathon ballot closes December 30th. Don't wait. Secure your spot at tcssydneymarathon.com and be part of history.
And I'm gonna hold my head up high. I was told as a young man, doesn't matter if you're white or black. Just show love to everyone you meet. Doesn't matter if it don't come back. On the